Afternoon. My name is Brian Steele. I am going to be the host today for our Increasing Professional Liability Exposures of Contractors presentation. So I just want to introduce the panel. So we have Gina Jones, who is our Vice President and Director of Environmental and Energy Programs. She's been in the business for over 30 years and develops experienced products in environmental and pollution. So I did my math right. She started at age 6. So next we have Derek, who's Associate Managing Director of our Michigan branch, professional liability broker. He's been with the company since 2014. His team specializes in cyber, E&O, A&E, healthcare, and executive lines. And then lastly is Erica Rangel. She sits in Chicago as a professional liability broker. She's been a professional liability broker for 17 years. She's been with Burns & Wilcox for the last 5. Like I said, she sits in Chicago and manages a team of brokers there, as well as other Midwest professional liability teams. On today's agenda, we're going to dive into the state of the market. We're going to discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages to the different delivery methods of these products. We're going to discuss some claims examples, as well as provide an outlook on the market, review any tips that brokers may have or questions they might have. And then we're going to finish with the Q&A, and I believe we already had a handful of questions come in. When it comes to the questions, if you have any, just type it in the questions box, and I'll be able to get them, and hopefully we'll be able to have some time to get to those at the end. To get started, we're going to start on talking about the challenges in the current market. So we're going to start with Derek, and what would you say some of the current challenges are that the contractors are facing?
Yeah, so I would say from the insurance market side of it, the overall marketplace is relatively stable, but most of our carriers have reported an increase in the severity of their claims. And we'd also expect from the insurance side that, there could be more pressure towards higher deductibles or self-insured retentions, depending on what project types individual contractors are partaking in. And in turn, that could cause some of the insureds to purchase an excess policy, which would have some costs. So overall, the cost and time to settle a claim is increasing. It's taking on average of much more than a year to kind of settle a matter. And while the frequency of our marketplace is stable, there's still an upward trend in the severity of claims and an increase in the overall cost to settle.
Thank you. On the opposite side, what are you viewing as some of the opportunities? And I'll shoot that to Erica.
Yeah, so we've definitely seen an uptick in contractor submissions over the last 2 years, I would say. This is really driving from contract requirements. Projects are now requiring that contractors carry E&O insurance. So we've been seeing a great uptick in the buying market for contractors E&O. And I think just in general, contractors have a big opportunity right now to differentiate themselves and what they can do in-house versus subcontracting to the owners. So our policies not only address, professional liability, but also we'll talk about later the pollution exposures. We are seeing a lot of new technology in the contractor and A&E world, 3D modeling, virtual reality, and even just like the way that people are working nowadays is different. So there's been a lot of changes to the types of projects that are being built these days. So long are the days of shopping malls and theaters and big office spaces. Now we're getting into hoteling and data centers and other kinds of, life science, logistics type businesses. So there's a lot of opportunity out there for contractors, and, finding a right policy to protect them is really important.
Great, thank you. Back to Derek. Obviously, there's there's advantages and disadvantages. I wouldn't mind if you kind of hit on some of those of like the real traditional design bid build delivery method, and maybe how those have been able to impact us for insurance policies.
Yeah, so in the traditional method of DBB, it involves the completion of 3 distinct phases. So construction would not begin until the design process is complete and the bid process is accepted. So there wouldn't be overlap between the design and the construction. This would create a clear distinction between teams, between architecture, designer, contractor. There's more clear cut or greater transparency between these groups. Contractors will have more opportunity for fair bidding, and it encourages contractors to kind of stay within their wheelhouse or their strengths versus accepting a job that they might not have a ton of expertise in. It also gives greater responsibility on the owner in the DBB process. As far as some cons on that, there is longer timelines. There is challenges with construction implementations, and then the owner bears the brunt of a lot of the project challenges with this method.
I'm going to go back to Erica. Thanks, Derek. But are there any other kind of advantages or disadvantages of other delivery methods outside of traditional design build?
Yeah, so we've been seeing a lot of submissions for contractors that also have design exposure. So we call this the design build delivery method. So contractors are hiring or have a separate entity that they're related to that does the design portion of the project. So they don't have to work, wait for a separate architecture firm to make the design and have it be fully completed before they start bidding the project. They're working hand in hand with the architecture firm to design the project, which then allows them to start bidding the project as the steps are, as the design is getting completed. This, allows for the owner to have a single point of contact. So, they have one entity to approach. They can be more involved in the design and construction phases. And it could also result in like a lower cost for the owner too, because, the architect and the contractor are working hand in hand, which could eliminate, the need for a lot of changes and change orders and extra expenses and all that kind of stuff. So we've been seeing a lot of increased submissions with the design build exposures. Another big exposure that we've been seeing is the at-risk construction management exposures. So the owner has a separate contract with, the architecture engineering firm to do the design, and then they have a separate contract with the contractor, and then that contractor would sub out the trades for the project. So the construction manager is involved from start to finish. He is involved in all the pre-construction. He does all the scheduling, the estimates, he puts the bids out there for the subcontractors. This can kind of help speed up the process because we're working in a more timely fashion. And it allows the owner to have a really good relationship with the contractor and the architect. So this is, we've been seeing a lot of these increased construction management exposures. And this can also help with the overall price of the project. They're trying to guarantee, that we can get the design and the cost and under schedule and in a tight schedule. So the construction management A&E is a big uptick in our submissions.
Thanks. And obviously we've done a lot of talking about just GCs. I don't know if Derek, you want to hit a little bit more on other types of contractors there are more than just paper GCs?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a ton of artisans recently, whether that's, plumbers, electrician, HVAC, painters, carpenters. More of those folks have been purchasing coverage. A lot of them think that because they don't hold the overall responsibility for the project, that they'll be unexposed to an E&O incident just by holding a general liability policy. But faulty workmanship comes up a lot in this artisan space, and that's something that the marketplace has done a better job of implementing on the broader forms. And it gets into the your work, your product, and impaired property exclusions that could leave an artisan kind of bare. And that's where we've seen a lot of uptick in binds from this sector.
Appreciate it. Gina, we didn't forget about you. I know you're on here obviously for a real big reason, and that's obviously to talk about environmental. And obviously we're seeing a lot that's kind of meshing in that E&O and environmental space, whether that's on one form, two forms, et cetera. But I don't know if you want to talk about, maybe following on that same item, just what are the environmental implications that we're seeing in the market?
And thanks for that, Bryant. And I appreciate you inviting me to be on this webinar with you. And you're right? The first thing to talk about is that every single account that crosses your desk has an environmental exposure. Every single account. And the problem that we face, is that most business owners, they don't realize they even have an exposure, so they don't want to carry the contractor's pollution liability coverage. Your clients believe that they haven't had an environmental claim, so they don't need the coverage. And I think this goes in line with every single type of account out there, whether it be environmental or not. The absence of risk does not necessarily mean the absence of loss does not necessarily mean the absence of risk. So when we're talking about contractors specifically, we need to talk about CPL, which is contractors pollution liability. And what contractors pollution liability is if there is a release at the job site and that the contractor is responsible for, our CPL policy is going to step in and take care of that pollution release, the cleanup, any bodily injury, any property damage that may occur. And why it would be important to carry CPL in this type of account when you're talking about a contractor that has some design build, and I'll certainly let Eric and Derek step in, but those PL policies may in fact have a pollution exclusion or a very limited coverage for pollution. So it's important that you have some other policy in place in case what you're installing, what you're building, what you're designing, in fact, causes some sort of pollution release and there's an exclusion on the policy. You're on mute.
Sorry, first time doing one of these webinars, or first time doing a Zoom call. But so sorry about that. When you, I don't know if you guys want to dive a little bit more into so in full disclosure, my background, I'm not a professional liability broker, and I've never been an environmental broker, and I think very few people have that expertise. I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit more in more almost layman's terms on claims examples. So maybe if each one of you could kind of hit on one that would just give a good example to an insured on why these policies are beneficial for them and really where they're coming in and stepping into play. Erica, do you want to go first?
Eric, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I think you're muted.
Again, first time that we've done this. So the claims example that I have isn't typical, but it kind of shows what additional coverages we offer in a contractor's E&O policy, which is, advertising and media liability. So I have a claims example of a plumbing contractor that launched a new website and decided to use some stock images that he found on Google to make it all pretty. And when he published it, he found out that these images were copyright. So an E&O policy, a contractor's E&O policy has that extension for advertising and media liability, which would then pick up, this kind of exposure that wouldn't typically be, contractor related.
Derek, would you want to go next?
Yeah, I can give a GC example here. So a GC hires that CM to run the day-to-day operations at the work site. There's accusations of persistent mismanagement of vendors and inaccurate budgeting. So both the construction manager and the GC were sued by the project owner. So despite not the insured being responsible directly committing this E&O, they're still named in the lawsuit, which, a lot of times just the defense alone can be very costly to these GC firms. So I think that's a good example of, just getting the defense out of these policies at minimum if it's a, kind of a frivolous incident.
Lastly, Gina, do you want to jump in on one? I think you're muted now. This is apparently all of our first times doing one of these.
There we go. Gosh, I love claim examples. The best way to sell insurance is to talk about claims and scare people. I mean, that's kind of what we do, right? So on this particular one, we had a mechanical contractor, and he actually designed the HVAC system. He installed the HVAC system. And they put it into a senior living facility. And I'm telling you, if there's ever anything that's ever going to go wrong, it's always when you're dealing with old people and kids. I'm telling you, I mean, hands down, it's kind of like the law of what's going to happen. But anyhow, the system was constructed improperly. It caused mold growth. So in a portion of the residences, they had to be relocated. They had to be moved out while they were doing the cleaning. So there was a claim for cleanup costs and property damage that resulted in about $350,000. And if that's a small contractor, that's going to put you out of business. I mean, $350,000 is going to shut you down. So again, important reasons why we need to carry CPL coverage. You want me to do the next one as well, or go back up to the other?
You can do one more.
I can do more. So the next one is a plumbing contractor, again, installing a lawn sprinkler system, and they didn't install it correctly. And again, this goes back to the design system, right? So they didn't install the adequate vacuum breakers and on the discharge of the water supply valves. And when the pressure in the drinking water system fed by the same water main fell below atmospheric pressure, a vacuum was created, which caused back siphonage of stagnant water from the lawn sprinkler system into the drinking water supply, right? And that's bad all the way around. So several people drank from the water supply, contracted dysentery. That's a pollutant, right? That's a problem. So costs were incurred to investigate the issue, purge the system, provide temporary clean water, and suits followed alleging bodily injury. This one is still open. So this one is kind of a little bit of a class action that's going on because it's the whole area there. So don't have the numbers that are in, but we're definitely defending our insured, and we're going to be taking care of a class action lawsuit on this.
Awesome, thank you. I kind of want to pivot a little bit and ask, and we're going to really go around the horn for a couple of these questions in the next part, but where do you guys see this market going over the next 12 months, and what can insureds expect to see? I'll let Gina go first this time, since I think she's gotten the short end of the stick every other time.
Yeah. So the market for environmental is different than everywhere else. And I know that you all hear me say this all the time, so I sound like a broken record to people that listen to me talk. But when the market goes hard with every other coverage, be it general liability, property damage, things of that nature, environmental, CPL, those kinds of things tend to go soft, and we go softer. Because people are trying to figure out what they're going to cut out of the equation, because their general liability, their professional liability, these things that they have to carry have escalated in premium. So what are they going to cut out? They're going to cut out the environmental piece. So for us, it's still a little bit of a soft market in our world. We also are not experiencing in the environmental arena the same things that maybe some other entities are. We have a lot of carriers. We have 60 plus carriers. We have a lot of aggregate limit, and price is soft. So for us, it's just we're still plugging along the best we can with the market that we're dealt with. So when you all love a hard market and you love the premiums, we kind of think, oh, please, can we just go a little different direction? So that's kind of where our market is. You're on mute.
I think the insureds are ready for something to be ready for a little bit of relief in soft markets. So at least they can get it in environmental. Erica, do you want to follow up where they're maybe seeing that on the professional line side?
Yeah, so we have definitely seen a lot of new markets enter this space and some exit. So it kind of just depends on, the type of risk. We're obviously seeing a lot of increased risk with residential exposures. Condos are always a hard thing to insure. But, in terms of the world, the economy is still struggling. There's still going to be supply chain issues, labor shortages. There's a war going on, and all of that affects, how, construction in America. So we're seeing a lot more opportunity. We're seeing a lot more in terms of premiums. They're pretty stagnant. But I would say that, the larger the contracts, the more complex the projects are. It's definitely going to be, a tougher write, but we're ready. We've got a lot of markets ready to entertain this type of business.
Awesome. Derek, anything you want to add to that, Derek?
Yeah, I think that to Erica's point, it really depends on the project types. I mean, townhome apartments, residential exposure she mentioned, but also if there's any infrastructure projects like roads and highways, those can pose a challenge. Overall, though, in comparison to last year, I mean, 0 to 10%, depending on the project type, is kind of where we're aiming to target as far as where premiums going as far as renewal trends. But again, it's important that we understand the full scope of the services that these contractors can offer, because a lot of them have a ton of different projects that they want to get into, and just making sure the policy curtails specifically to what projects they're looking to get into or they've taken on within the last year is really important as we go into the renewal cycle.
Awesome. Kind of along the same lines, but a little bit more of a different question. If you were an agent and this is a policy that you really don't see a lot of, do you offer any advice really to brokers or tips on what they should be doing to either get these type of policies in front of their clients, or explain really what the need is behind it? So any real broker advice? We'll go with Erica first this time.
Yeah, so I would say, if it's a first time buyer, they're new to the coverage, they've never been asked to carry it before. I think initially, just getting in front of their face and explaining some of the claims examples that we've talked about, they may not realize their vicarious exposure with working with some specialty subcontractors. So just kind of trying to educate them on, how they may be brought into a claim where they may not have been before. So we do this all the time, where we're giving out examples and pointing out policy features that could help change their mind.
Gina, do you want to follow that?
Sure. I agree with what Erica said, and Derek, they're really great points. I mean, it's important to enlist a broker who understands the class of business that you're looking at, right? And that is an expert in that. And understand the coverages and the things that you need to talk to your client about, and make sure that they understand them. And it's important that you talk about claims examples, because again, we go back to what I said, which is they don't think they have an exposure. So let's talk about what their exposures are. Let's talk about what some of the losses can be and how it can affect them. At the end of the day, obviously, it's up to your client if they're going to purchase it or not, but you're doing your job if you at least let them know, what their exposures and their claims examples can be, and talk to them about that. But most important, make sure you enlist a broker who really understands and is an expert in that type of account and client and risk.
Derek, anything you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, just a point. It's important to understand kind of the contract arrangements for each project that that GC has or whomever, just to make sure that, you know, insureds understand all their insurance requirements. Like Erica mentioned earlier, it's more prevalent now that a PL policy may be required, or that we understand as a broker the scope of the services as to a certain project type versus, you know, what they've done in the past. So I'd say ask your clients for that information and really have a good understanding, you know, further out than 30 days in the renewal cycle as to how that kind of works.
Kind of on the other front, and really talking about maybe brokers and et cetera, but when they're looking at policies that they're buying, obviously we talked a lot about E&O today, and it's fairly obvious, so we can talk about they should buy property and casualty coverages. What other policies are you guys currently seeing or offering in the contractor space that maybe is a little bit more unique? And, you know, like I said, don't say I'm putting a builder's risk policy in place for a guy who's building a building. Like, okay, that's fairly obvious. But what are the other things, the other policies that maybe contractors are buying in the marketplace, and that maybe there are some opportunities for, not to say an upsell, but really make sure they're fully covered? Derek, you want to go first on that?
Yeah, as far as the solution, and I mean, more the box stores, big box stores are requiring the artisans or GCs to purchase cyber. So that's something that we have seen a bigger uptick in what used to be a non-buyer in comparison to some of the high limits that those folks are requiring to purchase. So that would be a line that that we would see, but you know, also just from the contractor's form, making sure all the coverages are, you have your rectification and faulty workmanship and the CPL if it makes sense for that class. You know, those are all important items in addition that, you know, we got to make sure that we're offering depending on the scope of the insured.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I actually write a lot of employment practices liability for contractors. We've seen a big uptick in that as well. And, you know, employment practices liability covers harassment, discrimination. So, you know, we've got third parties alleging that they weren't hired because of their race or anything like that. So I've definitely seen an uptick in the EPL for contractors. And also manufacturers E&O has been a big, you know, hot topic too. Some of these contractors are designing and also building and manufacturing certain products. So we've got some carriers that are working on offering a manufacturer's E&O extension. We've got standalone markets for manufacturer's E&O. So, you know, to pick up the gaps that a typical GL policy wouldn't cover.
Right, and I'll jump in a little bit. In the environmental arena, we can add professional liability to our CPL policies as well. We're being asked to do that more and more. We're seeing a lot of contractors that are being required to carry professional liability, and they're an electrician and they have no exposure or whatever, and it's just simply for a contract. Many of our carriers will in fact package the CPL with the PL, but it's contractors' pollution liability, right? And so it's a little bit different than a full PL. And if they're doing any design build, we aren't going to be able to do that for them. So it's really just for the, you know, we're doing it for a contractual basis only. You know, Erica mentioned manufacturers. We actually love that in the environmental world, and we can package a lot of coverage on that. So if they're manufacturing anything and they're designing it, we can certainly write a general liability policy, give you site pollution, give you products pollution, give you E&O if they're designing it, and we're going to give you CPL on that policy if they're installing it. So when you're talking manufacturers, we can get very broad and give you a lot of coverage on those kinds of things. So think about that always.
Awesome, thanks guys. I've been just looking at the questions We've had a handful come through. So I'll ask it, and since you guys are the experts, if you're the best one to answer it, feel free to just jump in. I can tell you I'm not the person to answer it, but if somebody who has a GC client and is curious if we have suggestions for E&O and what subcontractors should be carrying for limits.
I can jump in. So typically we run out of the gate with, you know, $1 million limit for some of the trade contractors, the artisan contractors. That seems to satisfy a lot of the contract requirements that the owners are putting on these trades. So typically we can you know, work with $1 million limit, but I have seen, you know, higher. Typical, you know, if it's a big project, you know, that might require higher limits, but I would say between 1 and 5 is usually pretty standard. Even between 1 and 2 is probably the most common.
Seeing everyone's head nod up and down, so I'm assuming you two agree. Kind of the next question, and definitely I don't know who would be the best for this, so you guys can obviously jump in, but we're getting asked a lot about faulty workmanship. Can you please explain how E&O policy would be addressed in this coverage? Not an environmental question.
Yeah, I jump in here. Sorry. No. I got a little bit of feedback there, but you asked about faulty workmanship, Brian.
Yep.
Perfect. So, so the faulty workmanship extension would provide cover for the contractor's work product or impaired property after the job is complete and resulting from the negligence or errors and admissions. So if your company was held liable, our policy could pick up the cost to repair or redo that faulty work, as well as that defense component we mentioned earlier. The GL policy will only protect the damages that their work causes to the third party's property they're working on, but not the contractor's own work.
Yeah, and I guess I can step in and say that if it's faulty and it causes a pollution release, right, then of course we're going to step in and take care of the cleanup for bodily injury or property damage, but not the E&O piece, obviously, but certainly CPL, we can cover the faulty workmanship.
All right, we're on to our last questions. Might be able to give everyone 10 minutes of their day back, unless we're going down a rabbit hole on this one. But when you're looking at, let's see, so it's clients are usually only purchasing this insurance when their contract is requiring it. Can you please provide some ideas on why that necessarily might not be their best interest?
Yeah, I can start here. So typically if one contract's requiring it, you're probably going to get another one that's going to require it. So, you know, we do have the ability to write both practice policies and project specific policies. I think in the mindset, some people might think that a project policy is going to be cheaper because we're only going to use the rating basis, the revenue, the construction values of that one project versus all of their projects. But that's not necessarily the case. So we tend to get requests to quote both, to quote project specific and practice policies. And so, you know, we also see, you know, that we can write a practice policy, say for $2 million, and then they have a contract that requires them to carry 5. We can do excess limits that are specific to that project. So they would have $2 million for all of their jobs, and then that 3x of 2 would just be specific for that project. So that helps kind of alleviate some costs and, you know, can help them satisfy those contract requirements when one project might require more than another.
I do have one more. Oh shoot, it went away. It was I guess another one just came up. Should both GCs and subcontractors both be carrying these policies? Which I think the answer is yes, because I think we talked about that earlier, correct? All right. That's all the questions we have right now. So I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate, obviously, Gina, Erica, and Derek. I know you guys are very busy brokers, so appreciate you taking some time to answer some questions and explaining it to folks like me who don't really know a lot about E&O and environmental. So hopefully some agents were able to learn a lot of the same things that I was. So appreciate the time. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.